We're excited about today's event with Barry Schneier, who is the author of this great new book, Bruce Springsteen, Rock and Roll Future. It's a beautiful book that brings together all of Barry's photographs and his memories from a very historical night in Bruce's career and for the E Street Band. The date was May 9th, 1974, and the band played a show at the Harvard Square Theater in Cambridge, Massachusetts. In the audience that night was the music critic John Landau, who wrote the now famous concert review of all, probably the most famous concert review of all time, in which he wrote, I saw the future of, I saw rock and roll future, and its name is Bruce Springsteen. The rest is history, of course. John later became Bruce's manager. Bruce went on to massive fame after this. John is, of course, really heavily involved in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, on the nominating committee, and many other ways. Barry was there that night with his camera. His photos are the only visual record of that really historical performance. They were unseen for decades as well, and I think we're going to hear a little bit about that. We're also proud to say that Barry donated those photos as well as many other photos to our library and archives. So we're really proud to have him here to talk about this book. So he'll talk about the book itself and a little bit about his history. We're going to have copies of the book for sale, so we really encourage you all to get a copy, and he'll be out signing copies right outside the theater. So with that, I'm going to introduce our special guest. Barry Schneier is a photographer and writer who began his career in the 1970s working with up-and-coming as well as established musicians in Boston, San Francisco, and later in Los Angeles. It was there that he became immersed in the world of video and film production, working on features, commercials, documentaries, and eventually migrating over to the new genre of the era, the music video. Barry's work as a photographer has been exhibited in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, the Grammy Museum, and is housed in permanent collections at the Paramount Studios, CBS, MTV, the New England Folk Archives, and the Bruce Springsteen Archives and Center for American Music, in addition to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. His work has also appeared in numerous books, publications, as well as featured on album art. We're really excited to have him here. Please join me in welcoming to the stage our friend Barry Schneier.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. Mic's on, right? Good, good. Did I see a couple of spring nuts here? All right, all right. Great to see you folks here. Tell Howie I say hi. So I want to thank Andy and Gretchen and the whole staff for inviting me here. I first visited the Rock Hall a few years ago, and as I spend some time today, one of the things that really moves me is this incredible rich history that rock and roll has, that is amazing to witness and walk through yourself. I mean, it's just, I feel beautiful when I go through here and I say, my God, this music I love so much has this incredible history. And I'm very happy to have been invited to basically share some of my experiences, with, as Andy was saying, a very important night. So, my presentation will, focus a lot on my book, but what I like to do is I also like to talk about kind of my experience, working within the music industry, my love of music, and sort of how this whole thing came to be. And I believe when I'm done, this presentation is about 30, 40 minutes, I'll be happy to take questions from the audience. So basically, as I said, that I love music. I got involved in photography, and that kind of led to things happening. So we'll start with this. The year was 1974, and I was living in Boston, and it was a very exciting time to be in Boston in the 70s. Boston was a great city as a hybrid of politics and music and education, and it was just a place bubbling with excitement. And music was just part of our conversation. Music was something that we went to a lot, we talked about a lot, and this is the type of thing that you could experience in Boston in the mid-70s. 1 week The Who, 1 week Jeff Beck, 1 week Led Zeppelin for $3.50. You can go see a show like this, incredible. But this is from the Boston Tea Party, which was a legendary club in Boston. WBCN was the radio station at the time that basically was the voice for all this music. And just a quick side note, there's a documentary that's coming out soon on WBCN about the whole era, and it's called The American Revolution. And if you see it coming around eventually, I highly recommend seeing it. But the truth is, I grew up in a household full of music, and this is what I grew up with. My father was really big on show tunes, and we had them all the time. But music was always on in our house. And I bring that up because as we've raised, my wife, we've raised 3 kids, we always have music on. And I'm hoping all of you are the same way, that you have music on a lot in your house, you infuse it in your lifestyles, and you celebrate it with everybody. Music was important to me when I was young, and by the time I got to high school and rock and roll was really happening, music became the conversation we'd have with each other at school next day. Did you hear that on the radio last night? What did you hear on your transistor radio? What was interesting then is the DJs were the stars at the time, and these were some of the local DJs in Boston. And I was very lucky that Dave Maynard had his assistant was a good friend of mine's aunt, and she used to bring home records every week and stacks of 45s, and so we always were listening to new music. And it was just an incredible time to just be involved with it. And then it happened. And everything was different after that. When the Beatles hit the scene, I remember thinking to myself, how can I get my hair that long? I honestly was pulling my hair down over my ears, to try to get that look. But the Beatles had such an influence that everybody had a band, I had a band. That's me on the right side, and it was just part of what we did. Bands, I don't want to use the term, but they're kind of like we were the gangs of the time. We had turf, we had followings. Whoever was popular would bring their crowd to their concerts and their events. And it was just it was immersed in our lives. I carried on my interest in music into college. I went to Temple University in Philadelphia, and I became a DJ on WRTI FM, and that's me on the far left interviewing 10 years after. And it was a great opportunity to continue my love of music. I went to college eventually at Emerson, and at Emerson College, I met a student named Ira Gold, who was on the far left. Now, Ira and Jeff Hirsch in the middle was another man named Dick Waterman, were Bonnie Raitt's management team. That's Bonnie there. And I met them, and I said, geez, I'd love to kind of photograph your shows. And they said, well, sure, let's do that. So I had opportunities back in the mid-'70s to shoot acts like Van Morrison, Boz Scaggs, Paul Butterfield. But what was interesting about that time, and oftentimes this happens when I speak or when I've exhibited, people say to me, how did you get so close, And I kind of said, that's just kind of how it was. I mean, here's just, afternoon sound check, Jackson Browne and Bonnie Raitt, just hanging out, talking to each other. They had just met each other. Bonnie had actually started to do some shows opening up for Jackson. But it was kind of like we were all sort of in this world together. They were kind of being discovered. There weren't the giant arena shows yet. So everybody was like kind of experiencing this whole wonderful thing at the same time. I mean, it was like, artists would come, and I would be able to hang out with them as Boz Scaggs backstage. And it was just this, I call it just this a lot of love. They were learning to be musicians. They were learning to become successful. We as artists were learning our craft. And we kind of like, we're all in this whole thing together. One of the things that kind of fascinated me, and I talked about how things have changed now, is when I'm going through my photos and kind of like, scanning them and, getting them ready for the book and some other events, I came across this shot of Jackson Browne at Soundcheck, which I really love. It's just kind of a nice, interesting shot of him. And then I found this shot of him during the performance. And I noticed that he's wearing a black shirt there and a white shirt here. And I realized this is actually during the performance that night. And I'm standing next to the bass player on stage. It's like, it's crazy. That wouldn't happen today, But that's just how it was. It was really a time of celebration and just joy. I left Boston. I moved to the West Coast. Got a chance to photograph Patti Smith in a very early stage in her career. She had not even released Horses yet, and had actually come out to the West Coast to do just a couple of days. So this is her performing at the boarding house. Jesse Colin Young. This is actually a shot, if you remember, Jesse Colin Young from the Youngbloods. He lived in Point Reyes, California, Northern California, where I lived. He was actually doing a benefit for a local elementary school. He was playing in the gymnasium. Joan Armatrading. Pablo Cruz. I love this shot because this is, to me, a very classic 70s rock star shot. He's got the perm, the open shirt. He's got the necklace. It's beautiful, It's classic. When I was in LA, I started to get more involved with some people from the record industry and started going to what they would call showcases for new artists, which was kind of a fun thing to do. When an artist would release a new album, they would book a place like the Whiskey, and they would perform there and perform their album for fans and guys in suits, mostly. But here's the Motels, Martha Davis and the Motels. It was just, just a great time. When I think about music and I think about what I do as a photographer, there's kind of I say there's a story about everything. When we listened to music then, we listened on albums. There was no streaming, there was no internet, there was no CDs, digital files. And I joke about how when we shared music, we physically gave the album to somebody. That's how you shared, and you hope you got it back. But just like I mentioned earlier, whatever we were hearing, we would discuss with our friends. Did you hear this artist? Did you hear this artist? And so one time, my roommate, who was a good friend of mine since high school, brought home these records. And he said, hey, I hear this guy is supposed to be pretty good. And he was getting some airplay at the time on WBCN. And he was kind of like starting to play locally in some of the bars, and he was just kind of getting known a little bit. Still kind of unknown, still trying to make a name for himself. As you can see, they couldn't even spell his name right back then, But, he was really just kind of becoming almost part of our local community. So we decided we have to go see this guy, So we went and saw him over at this club called Joe's Place. And I remember when I went to see them, the band, 6 members of the band, were set up in a corner. It could have been 12 feet by 12 feet. And I look around, and the place is pretty full. And it's just a bar. And I'm thinking to myself, this is interesting. Well, why are there so many people here? And I'm sitting in one of those booths, and there's somebody sitting across from me who I didn't know. And he looks at me, he goes, you mean you've never heard this guy before? I said, no. He goes, I've been following him up. I'm from Philadelphia. I've been following him up and down the coast, watching him play. My first thought was, why the hell would you do that, And what kind of crazy person does that? But the truth is, by the time, he did a show, I understood. And I remember saying to myself, I've never heard music like that in my life. The tightness of the band, the mixture of the R&B, the jazz influences, and his sense of being a performer just struck me like nothing I'd ever heard before. Well, what I did immediately is I called up my friends Ira and Jeff, and I said to them, you've got to put this guy on at a show. I said, and if anything else, I just have to see him again. I admit it was totally personal. So Ira came over to my house, listened to the records, borrowed them. That was the last I saw of them. Played them for Jeff, and then they went the next night to meet Bruce at the club, at Joe's Place, which led to this. Now, Bonnie Ray was, I said, Jeff was Bonnie's manager, and Bonnie had mostly been opening up for acts at this time. She had toured with Jackson Browne, opening up for him, and they really wanted to give her her own night, where she would be the headliner, and she was local to the area, so they had booked her already for the show at Harvard Square Theater. It was going to be just her. They had no plans for an opening act, but they decided they wanted to put Bruce on as the opening act, and Ira was somebody that always liked to find somebody that's kind of unknown to bring on as an opening act to give him some exposure. So this came about, and you could go for $4, which is still crazy when you see that, But I remembered that I came in that night, and I came into us in the afternoon during sound check, and I remember I've been to photographed enough shows at that time where sound check is basically they get on stage, they play a few songs, listen to the monitors, and they go out and they have dinner. Bruce was on stage for like 45 minutes. He was rehearsing the band, he was looking at them, he was pointing, he'd have them do numbers over and over again. And I realized to myself, this wasn't a sound check, this was a rehearsal. There was something very different going on here. And what was interesting was, and one of the great things about doing the book is we were able to talk with Boone Carter and David Sanchez, about their experiences with the band back then. One of the things that Boone told us is Bruce was very serious to work with. Not serious in a bad way, but serious in a good way. At rehearsals, there was no screwing around, but it was fun, And I remember him working that night. He'd do a song, stop it, rehearse it again, point to Clarence, point to David, do it again, and it was just really, really, really important to them. It was interesting because when I reflect back on this and I think about him and his incredible work ethic, for one, and his passion for music, his passion for doing it right, I thought to myself, this is what I call passion with purpose. He had a mission that night. He had something he needed to accomplish. And I had learned, again, when we were working the book, that they knew that there was a very famous music critic on the night, and they knew it had going to be a show. good show. And the other thing also was, if you know the story, the band wasn't doing very well as far as record label was concerned. They had those 2 albums out to date, critically acclaimed, poor sales. The label was ready to drop them. As a matter of fact, Boom told us a story about how when they went to Atlanta to do a show once, they couldn't even find their records in the record stores. The Columbia Records had actually started to pull their records out of the stores in hopes of promoting other artists, and they actually were telling the disc jockeys not to play them anymore. You know, they knew this was a very important night. They knew this was a very important time in their career. So, you know, it's always interesting to me that when you have a purpose or you have something to do and you know it's an important night, you know, what are you going to do? Now, I had brought a group of friends of mine to see the show that night. Obviously, you know, excited about sharing his music with friends of mine. And I remember when Bruce hit the stage, all of a sudden he opens up with a very slight tone to his guitar, looks at the audience and says, "Meanwhile, in New York City." David Sanchez starts to play the opening chords to New York City Serenade, and my first thought was, what is he doing? This is a rock and roll show. You're opening up with a classical melodic song. You know, I don't get it. But I realized he knew exactly what he wanted to do. He wanted to grab the attention of the audience. He wanted to do something that they did not expect to get their attention. And it's interesting because today you hear the term disruptor a lot. At the Facebook headquarters, they used to have a sign, "Move fast and break things." Well, the idea of doing something that was unique and would break the mold and get attention, people tend to think that's what the people do now. Well, I would beg to differ and say arts and the musicians have been doing it for years. You know, he was a disruptor back then. He knew what he had to do to get the person's audience's attention. And by the time they were well into the song, it was totally quiet in the house. He had them in his hands. He knew what was going on. I always like this shot here because he kind of reminds me of Elvis a little bit in the look here. And if you've read the autobiography, if you've seen the Broadway show, he talks about how seeing Elvis and the Ed Sullivan was his aha moment. Because he saw Elvis, said, "I can do that," rented a guitar, didn't even know how to play, went on the back of his house, stood on his porch, played the guitar, swiveled his hips for his neighbors. They all started screaming. As he says in his book, "I smelled blood," you know. And he knew what he was meant to do. The idea of him being a performer and have a stage presence, I think, is something we all know today. But I saw back then that he had such a sense of what it was like to be a performer. He knew about stage presence. He also knew about creating character. Now, we all know his songs have fantastic characters, but the look he had with the leather jacket and the use of the hat as a prop, you know, he understood what it was like to be a performer. And it's interesting, you know, the show Springsteen on Broadway, and if some of you got to see it in New York, you were very lucky. Hopefully, if you didn't, you got to see the next Netflix special. But I look back at this and I say, Springsteen on Broadway, he was on Broadway back then. He knew what it was like to be a performer. He knew the importance of having a show like this. He also was a storyteller. Now, as a photographer, I like to think of my photographs as being stories as well. But he knew the importance of story. And he would tell stories during the songs. He would tell stories in between the songs. And he used to talk quite a lot of bit. Matter of fact, I remember that night he was telling a story about when they checked into a motel, but how they opened the doors and one room was just filthy. It was just, you know, it had one light flickering, you know, moss doing around it, and how they fought for the best room. I think Gary Taylor was the one that won it. But he just had the ability to like tell a story that would just bring you in, and he would do this in between all the songs. It was just something that he continues to do his day, and I think even his latest release, Western Stars, is just another testimony to just his incredible ability to tell tales. Boone Carter, interesting story. I don't know how many of you know the name, how he got his name Boone. When he was 12 years old, he learned to play the drums. Now, his father was a photojournalist for the Asbury Park Press and used to cover the music scene. And Asbury Park has a great R&B tradition, which obviously you can hear the influences of Bruce's early music. So his father used to take him around to different shows, and he decided to want to be a musician. So they bought him a set of drums, and one day, all of a sudden, there's a call, there was a report of gunshots in his house. The police show up, and it was Boom practicing downstairs. And that's how he got the name Boom. David Sanchez, amazing keyboardist. As you probably know, has gone on to work with Peter Gabriel, with Sting, and he and Boom formed their own band, Tone, after this. A little story that I kind of remember about that night. After sound check, David stayed on the stage, and he was still playing the piano. And all of a sudden, he went into this jazz improvisation. And I thought to myself, this guy's an incredible jazz musician. Why is he playing in a rock and roll band? This is just really crazy. When we spoke to him, for the book, it was interesting because I said, I just remember you playing the piano that night and working it up. And he said they had rented for him this, I can't say that brand of it, but it was a full, a full concert piano, and he never got one of those before. He loved the piano so much that he stayed there after sound check just to play with it. Gary Talent. Gary's, as you know, in the band now, the only original member of the band besides Bruce that's still in the band today. I remember seeing him on stage and thinking, for a while, I didn't know he was a member of the band because he just came in with a jean jacket, and his jeans and his long hair. I thought he was just somebody from Harvard Square walking around who came in, But it was interesting because when we were talking to Gary, and actually, I did just speak to him recently. He's got a great new album out called More Like Me. So we were talking about his record. And he was asking me, how's it going with the book? How's the project going? And I said, no, it's good. We're having some nice response to it. And he says, I had the fondest memories of that era of the band. And he said, the band was integrated 50-50. We had 3 black guys and 3 white guys, and that was really kind of unheard of at the time. And we toured the Deep South, and we just did it. And we did it, and we were accepted. And it made me think about how unique that was, in a sense, but how, again, an example of how music just really transcended things, back then, as it does today. Danny Federici, the Phantom. I don't know if you know the story about how he got the name, but the simple story was when they were playing shows in Monmouth, was Monmouth College at the time. Let's just say Danny, I wouldn't say he was a troublemaker, they said, but he sometimes had an altercation here or there. And apparently the local police were looking for Danny. And they knew that he was performing with the band at Monmouth College. So the police had decided they were not going to do anything, wait till the show was over. And the band got wind of it. So towards the end of the set, Bruce called up a bunch of people from the audience to come on stage and dance and have fun. And what he did is he got them all to surround the band and surround Danny, who slipped out the back and went off the field and into his car and left. Hence, he was known as the Phantom, And I think they just let it go at that. But it was interesting because this is one of these photos that one of the things that caught my eye was where Danny's eyes are looking. The band members have told me that during performances, they keep their eyes on Bruce the whole time. And that's actually still true today because they never know what he's going to do next. And when I talked to Boom, he talked about how when he was first learning the music and first rehearsing with the band, there was so many different chord changes, so many different words, and so much guitar work that he had to keep his eye on Bruce the entire time to follow him. And it's interesting because that's really true today. I'm sure maybe you have gone to the concerts, that sometimes the set list gets thrown out after the 3rd song. The band has to continually keep their eyes on him. And it's always interesting because I've noticed in some of the photography I've done, especially Max Weinberg, his eyes are always on Bruce because he just doesn't know where things are going to go next, which is great because it keeps everything fresh and keeps people on their toes. It's one of my favorite photos of Bruce and Clarence. Clarence was this big hulk of a man, as Bruce was said. You all want to be as big as him, but none of you ever will be. But he was very quiet on stage, very, kind of to himself. And this was also during New York City Serenade. And when I looked at this photo recently, I was thinking to myself that there's kind of this look of Bruce is kind of caught off, with his mind just wandering somewhere and just into the moment. And Clarence is there kind of almost saying, don't worry, brother, I got your back. Um, I think of this, I think of that expression, the band of brothers. I mean, they truly were, they truly were. Spirit of the Night, this is what's on Spirit of the Night, and I was only able to figure it out because someone told me later on, they noticed he's playing a harmonica in the song. He used to open up Spirit of the Night with the harmonica. This was a good example to me of kind of the intricacies of the music he did at the time, as it does today. A lot of chord changes, a lot of interesting little different rhythms. And one of the things that I learned in studying a little bit for this for writing this book was that I read a lot about how music affects the brain, and why we react to certain things this way, and why music does what it does to us. And there's some fascinating studies. But one of the things I read about was that when we hear rhythms that are repetitive and the same, we tend to get bored. You know, sadly, you know, there's a lot of music that still uses that. You know, but if we hear something, and all of a sudden the song changes a little bit, it perks up our attention, and this little chemical process actually begins in our nervous systems, where we start to anticipate what's going to happen next. And there's actually a point where, as things rise and as momentums change and things build to a sudden change, and you go, yeah, there's actually an endorphin release. And I don't know if he knew that was part of why his music was working so well, but he had the ability to write and construct songs that would lead people through this sort of musical, you know, neurosynapse adventure, you know, which I think contributes a lot to why when we hear him live, especially today and since then, that the concerts are so big and powerful, because we go with him along the ride with his music as it builds. You know, it's part of what he does. And Spirit of the Night to me was one of a great examples of that song. And even when he does it today, he still brings a lot of great, great jazz tones in it. Just a little kind of funny side story. I'm sure some of you know what a Ouija board is. When I was living in Northern California, I had a friend of mine who was really into the Ouija board. And she said, I'm going to bring it over one night, we'll do it. I said, okay, fine. I wasn't a believer or a disbeliever. I figured, yeah, we'll do it. We'll see what's going on. So, you know, you put your hand on the little device and you ask questions and it moves around. And, you know, I'm just letting it go. I'm not moving it, you know, and it's moving around saying yes or no. And all of a sudden, it starts to move almost like violently, you know, from the middle to the top corner where the moon is, the middle to the top, shoving back and forth. And I'm going stuff, I'm not doing this. And she's going like, I'm not doing this either. And I'm looking at it and going, okay, you ask questions. I said, okay, spirit, moon, spirit, moon, spirit, night, spirit, night. And that moment, the song Spirit of the Night was actually playing on the radio. And I said, oh my God, Spirit of the Night. And at that moment, there was a crackle. The radio went to static, shut off, put the Ouija board away, never got taken out again. So I was talking about the sense of performance and the sense of building. And it was interesting because at the time when he was performing, his music was just kind of getting some airplay. And one of the songs everybody knew was Rosalita. Everybody knew when Rosalita would come, it was the big moment where everything would build up to. Again, 24 years old, tremendous sense of performance, tremendous sense of what a stage show would be like, would drive the audience, build it to this point of Rosalita. So these are a couple of shots of Rosalita. I think that's the shot I saw downstairs as in the exhibit, you know, which was kind of fun to see today when I came in. Another shot from the side from Rosalita, you know, of Rosalita. Again, just able to sort of, you know, stand on the side. There's somebody hanging out over the sound rack. Just how it was. We were just a group of people enjoying our music, having a good time, and lucky that all this was going on stage. And another shot here from. Now, this is a shot from Born to Run. Now, of course, the interesting story is, obviously the album wasn't recorded for at least a year from here, this night, over a year actually. And he, knowing John Landau was in the audience that night, decided to premiere a new song he'd written. And he premiered Born to Run for his first time ever live that night. When John Landau wrote the review, he referred to it as that song with the Telecaster guitar, with the I forget the musician's name he referenced. But the song at the time didn't really have a name yet, and I remember that when I talked with Ira, the promoter, some years later, he mentioned about how when they were doing a concert following up this, he asked Bruce for a cassette of songs so he'd create a radio promo. So I gave him this cassette of an early track of Born to Run, which originally was called Tramps Like Us. You know, and I asked Ari if you still have that cassette. He goes, no, I don't. That would be a relic to have for sure. So anyway, this image here from the song For You, this is the one that a lot of people have, you know, focused on, had intention. It's a photograph I'm very proud of. But the story is behind this is that I said I had told Ira and Jeff to put him on the concert because I wanted to see him again. Brought a bunch of friends in. I had been photographing good sound check. He did 2 shows that night, 7 and 10. And actually, the interesting thing about that is he was supposed to do only 30 minutes. He did 45 minutes in the first set. He did an hour 15 in the second set. Really upset Bonnie Raitt's band, who were backstage waiting to go on. But Bonnie kind of knew something was special, and the band was getting really antsy. And she kind of just turned to them and said, no, you guys wait. This is something special going on here tonight. She knew it. So anyway, so I've been photographing pretty much the whole night. And a point comes, I say, I'm just going to enjoy the show now. I got to allow myself. So I kind of just go up the stage, walk in the back of the stage, sit on the edge of a drum case, sit down. As soon as I sit down, Boom Carter gets off the drums, starts walking up the stage towards me. Gary Tellen unplugs his bass, comes walking over towards me. And I'm going, great. I finally get to stop, and they're done with the set, you know? So anyway, and all of a sudden, the band members walk over. I remember they're standing right next to me on the side of the stage. And then Bruce comes over, he sits down and starts playing the piano. And my first thought was, oh, I had no idea he played the piano. My second thought was, I'm going to reload my camera, you know? So I'm literally sitting 3 feet from him, reloading my camera, and he starts playing this very delicate, soft version of that song, For You. And I just remember, like, with the camera just going, oh my word, this is incredible. And of course, we shot film then, which was analog, which made sounds as you turn the sprockets. So I was very cautious, you know, just turning it 1 frame at a time, clicking very softly. My thoughts were, this is really a magical moment, and I do not want to disturb him in this. So I was very fortunate that I got about a roll of film shot with him just, you know, playing the piano, this one being my favorite one. But it was kind of interesting because in John Landau's review, he actually calls out the song For You and mentions about how he played it with this soft delicacy and quietness that could be heard, you know, as far as, you know, up in the balconies. You know, it was really just an amazing moment. So obviously, John Landau impressed with the show, and this is what came out of it. You know, and the interesting thing about this review, and I don't know how many of you have actually ever read the full review, as much as this line is really called out from the review itself is a love letter to rock and roll. I suggest if you can find it online. It's basically talking about somebody who, being John, who had been in the music business. He had done some record producing. He was writing for Rolling Stone. He became very jaded with music. He thought rock and roll was over. And it's interesting because I actually did a lecture at a college in Boston recently with a music professor, and one of the things he mentioned is that rock and roll, when it first came out, people thought it was going to have a 10-year lifespan until the next, you know, genre came about. No one believed rock and roll had a future. So I really think when John Landau wrote this review, he all of a sudden became reinvigorated. He all of a sudden realized rock and roll had a future. Music had a future. So I think when he writes this, when he says, I saw rock and roll future, and his name is Bruce Springsteen, it wasn't just that he saw the future with Bruce Springsteen. He saw that rock and roll would have a future. And it kind of like reignited him, which eventually, you know, got the two of them involved with the recording of Born to Run, which led to their management, you know, relationship today. And as Bruce definitely talks of John so fondly as the guy that has just kept him honest and just embraced all his projects from that point on, and they have an incredible relationship. Now, what was also good was the record labels got a hold of that quote, and they started this massive marketing campaign where basically they started, you know, placing these type of ads everywhere. And in a sense, that review, and even now, I think Bruce will actually admit, as he once said, he hated the phrase, he hated being called that, he hated the hype. But as he said, if someone was going to be the future of rock and roll, why not me? And in a lot of ways, it saved his career. Suddenly, the marketing departments from Columbia Records put money back into promoting the album, and suddenly they were getting airplay again. The records were getting sold again, and so he basically went into record Born to Run. They were ready to to release it and get behind it, because he had a 3-album deal at the time, and if nothing had happened, they would have maybe not even, they would have recorded it, might have shelved the album. So he hated the hype, but he looks back on it, he's very happy it did it. And in the book, I was very happy because Chris Phillips, who was the editor of Backstreets, who published the book with me, did a tremendous amount of research into finding out all the different aspects of the marketing campaign at the time, what people thought, how people reacted to it, and kind of, how things really turned around from. And it's just kind of, exciting that, all this really happened, because people would say to me later, they said, well, when you read the review, did you agree with it? And I said, yeah, I saw it, but, it's until somebody else picks up on it, he's going to just be playing small clubs. So anyway, that was back in 1974. As we know, things have changed a lot for him since then, and I've been very fortunate to have continued to have a relationship. And 40 plus years later, I had an opportunity to continue to shoot him again. This was on the 2016 River Tour. I think this is in Boston, Mass. That's in Hartford, Connecticut. It's in Madison Square Garden, and what was thrilling about this shot is I love this shot, and I sent it over to them, and I was very happy to end up showing up on their website for a while, which was very kind of cool. And then here, this is at the River Tour finale at Gillette Stadium in Foxborough, Mass. Just a wonderful night. I do remember, it's funny, when I was getting ready to go out to shoot, I was talking to another photographer with some newspaper, and he was loaning his camera, and he says to me, he goes, well, what kind of music does this guy play? Okay, just go out there and shoot, you'll find out soon enough. Another one from the Gillette show, and what's interesting is, I thought was kind of fun, was he was opening up this leg at the end of the tour with New York City Serenade. So kind of, for me, it was like kind of full circle, like 45 years later, he's opening a show with the same song they always saw him open up with in 74. Just another, some other shots from him on stage. Of course, I know we're all looking forward to the next tour, whenever that comes. But one of the things that I love about photographing them now is you've probably seen that, is there's such a relationship, such a kinship between the members of the band. They really enjoy themselves. They really have fun. It's a great relationship with them, especially these two clowns. And if any of you haven't seen Stephen's band, if you have a chance, even though I know he's taking a break from it, it's incredible. It's just an amazing band to see perform these days. And this one here was shot in Harvard, at the bookstore at Harvard Square, at the Harvard Coop. He was on his Born to Run book tour. Again, these are some of the shots that are in the book as well. So I've continued to work with some of the individual members of the band since then. They get their breaks. Gary Talent, a wonderful guy. He has a new album out, More Like Me, and this was during his break time tour. He himself is a big 50s rockabilly fan, and when he was touring with his break time band, he had this fantastic set of musicians that were all out of Nashville, which is where he lives now. And his albums, his solo albums are great, and I would recommend anybody listening to them if they can. Jake Clemens, who's done some wonderful stuff. He just has a new release. And again, really nice guy, just really warm individual. Another one of Jake. And I mentioned Stephen. Stephen's out on the road, and again, I know the tour has been canceled, but if you ever have a chance to see him with the Disciples of Soul, it's just an extraordinary man. We were talking about this with someone earlier. He's a walking encyclopedia of rock and roll music. You can hear it on his Sirius XM station, and when he does his show live, he takes you through all the genres of music that his band plays, gives you the history about it. It's really kind of an amazing night. His band is just incredible, and I have a fondness for 60s R&B, so I just love the band. And Niels Lofgren, who's just, again, another fantastic guy, incredible musician, great songwriter. I've been able to photograph him on a couple of his recent tours of solo stuff. Extraordinary person. And I continue, to shoot other acts as they come through town, as I get an opportunity to do it. Some of the ones I just put in, I happen to like. This is one of my favorite artists, Todd Rundgren. Tremendous artist. This is Sarah Lee Guthrie, Woody Guthrie's granddaughter. She performs with her husband, Jeremy Irons, a fantastic folk duo who live out in Western Massachusetts. Willie Nile, who's a great act out of the New York punk scene, still doing it today. Just a really nice guy again. And it's just been, I've been very fortunate to be continuing to be able to, to be involved with music and just enjoy this incredible experience. To me, music is so much about community. This shot here just to me says so much. There's this communication that happens between artist and audience that I don't know is really so true in other art forms. While the artist is creating something on stage in real time, the audience is enjoying it in real time. And there's this give and take that goes back and forth. And I think the same sort of thing that goes on literally in our physical systems that makes our neurons connect to make us feel euphoric happens live as well. I think that connection is just like something that's just like not anything else. So, I mean, I've really been fortunate to have shot him over the years, to continue to enjoy a relationship. And I always like to say, as much as it's fun to photograph Bruce Springsteen, it's always fun to get photographed with Bruce Springsteen. This was from the Springsteen on Broadway show. We had a chance to go there and spend a little time backstage. If you haven't seen the show on Netflix, I highly recommend it. It's a really beautiful work of art. And that's the story. So thank you very much. If anyone wants to take any questions, I'd be happy to take them now. But that's my presentation. Thank you.